So we're here with my good friends James and Hannah, and we're here to talk about worship. We're here to talk about worship being a lifestyle. And our community have heard us say this many times over the years that worship is of course a Christian thing, but worship isn't just a Christian thing, it is just a human thing. Hannah, do you want to talk a little bit about that, just as we kind of wrap our heads around what is worship?
Yeah, I think that that is really, really important. Like, whenever we think of this conversation of worship, that it's so much bigger than those moments of congregational coming together and singing songs and speaking out liturgies together, but actually that we all worship, whether consciously or subconsciously, throughout our days, in our workplaces, and how we interact with each other and with ourselves. And that worship is what we give our worth to, what we find we find ourselves giving our attention to. And so whether that is money or what people think about, what they think about us, or whether that is God, it's a really, really important question to be asking ourselves. What are the things that I worship? And it's really, really important because like theologically, whenever you look at this, whenever you look at worship, it's actually a beautiful gift that God has given us, because it forms how we interact with each other, how we view ourselves, how we find purpose in and through our days. And there's a theologian, G.K. Beale, and he says about like what we revere, we resemble either for ruin or for restoration. And just this idea of the things that we worship, that we long for in our lives, that they affect who we are and who we're becoming. So actually worship is so much bigger than those moments congregationally, although they're very important. I know that we'll talk about that as well, but actually what worship is, it's part of our formation. It spiritually forms us.
There's a writer that I really love who says that like the crucible of formation is worked out in the reality of everyday ordinary life. And could you just speak to that a little bit more in terms of like what does this actually look like in a life? Like how do we actually worship in our everyday ordinary lives? What does that look like?
Yeah, yeah. I think like if you just think of a lifestyle in general, like living a healthy living lifestyle, it's not that you just have this one moment in your week that you go to a spin class or something, and then all of a sudden it's like gifts. If I go to this, I tick the box of I live a healthy lifestyle. It's making sure that you are drinking enough water and that you're getting enough sleep, and you're thinking about like the food that you consume, and yes, moving your body and what exercise looks like for you. But I think in terms of whenever we think of this lifestyle, I guess for me, like in the like horse world, they have this analogy of a half halt, and it's this idea of like when you're riding a horse, and it's like energy is just getting away from itself a wee bit, and it's just like moving through the paces too quickly. It's an aid of like just half halting the horse back to like regather its energy, to rebalance itself. And I guess I think of like those kind of moments throughout my day and throughout my week that kind of half halt me, rather than just going with the motion of things, but actually pulling myself back and being like, where is God in the midst of this thing that I'm doing, in the midst of this board meeting that I'm walking into, or just came off the back of a tantrum with a 2-year-old or whatever, like those things that just kind of help to like pull yourself back and be like, where is God in the midst of this? And just, yeah, like I guess just reorientating yourself and refocusing your attention on Him in the midst of that. Like, yeah, like I would see that as a lifestyle. So it's not necessarily just these, you know, moments on a Sunday, like if we go and worship together, that ticks the box of I have a worship lifestyle. But actually, what does it look like really, really practically throughout your day? And I guess that looks really different at different seasons. Again, when you think of a healthy lifestyle, like when you're a kid in school, you maybe go to loads of different like sports after school, you're doing hockey and tennis and whatever, and it all looks different versus what it looks like to be like a freshly postpartum mum. Like that's going to look really different in terms of what that lifestyle of worship looks like compared to what it looks like whenever you're a teenager and all those things. So I think it's like the flexibility in it as well. It's not like that it's just these like certain practices that you have to do, but it's actually these things that half halt you and give you loads of life, of just refocusing your attention and reminding yourself of who God is, and that He loves you and that He sees you in every season of life. and helping you just to find your purpose in that. Yeah.
That's really, really helpful. I guess just to reflect back what I'm hearing you say, because in our imagining, for me anyway, whenever I think of worship, I probably instantly think of singing. And yet what you're saying is that yes, that's part of it, but there's so many avenues in terms of how you're able to engage in worship. And that's true. However, I'm going to turn to you with this. There is something about singing that is really important whenever it comes to the formation of our worship, in terms of giving due adoration to God. We see that throughout the scriptures. Like this morning, I was reading the Psalms of that just had these refrains over and over of "Sing to the Lord a new song." There's something of singing that's really, really important. Do you want to speak to that, and particularly, I guess, in the tension of like worship is more than just moments of corporate singing, and yet there's something significant that happens whenever we gather together for that one moment in a week to sing.
Yeah, I think like when you listen to people talking about this, like the pendulum swings like either to one side or the other. You know, it's either worship is just singing or worship is just, you know, the lifestyle thing of like giving worth to God and everything that you do. I've probably swung from side to side and realized actually it's not either or with most things. It's both. And but when we talk about worship, it's really hard in our modern day English language, because we have like taken like I don't know how many words from the Bible, but there's at least 7, but there's probably many more, you know, maybe 20 words for the word worship.
Sure.
You know, so you have the like avodah, which is like work and worship, and you have that. But then you have other words, secondary words, like the word praise when we say the word worship, which means so many different things. So I think that's partly why we bump into this kind of like we're not really sure what worship is. Is it this? Is it singing, or is it this? Or is it just inviting God into your everyday ordinary life? But I think it's both. I think the singing thing is really, really important. It's something that we're deeply passionate about for loads of reasons, but I suppose the main is that there's no way of getting away from the kind of biblical framework for the invitation to sing to the Lord. Like it's you can't miss it, and I don't think it's a choice. I think it's a command. You know, I think like a lot of people that I kind of know that struggle with this, you know, they're like, oh well, you know, like I don't really do the singing, but you know I do worship God in my own wee way, you know, and it's like I don't think you get the choice in this. Like I think it's pretty clear it's a command, you know. So so yeah, I mean biblically, like there's secondary words like the word praise, which there's like 7, well according to the head of theology in Northern Ireland here, there's
We're graced by your
7's a
presence
nice
today.
number,
It's almost
and there's 7 main, but there's loads.
there's apparently many more,
you
but
can do 7 if you want.
we taught into these recently with our worship community, like the kind of main 7 that you would see, you know, which are all like they're all like body postures, you know, so it's like kneeling, it's jumping up and down, it's singing really loud, there's like the plucking of strings.
Sure.
So like, and like I don't have the actual stats in front of me, but the amount of time that invitation appears in scripture to do these things, like I just don't think we can get away from it, you know. So I think there's definitely a biblical kind of framework for it, but also like I mean for us, and I know for yourself, like there's far too many experiences that we've had in gathered environments where we sing and stuff happens, and
Sure.
you can't deny that, you know. Like I would say, you know, maybe 75%, if not more, of new people that walk in through the doors who don't know Jesus, like it's in an atmosphere of singing that the presence of God just impacts them, and you know they begin to weep, they begin to cry, they begin to, you know. Now the cynical mind towards that would be like, oh, this is just, you know, hype or emotional stuff that's going on. But like there are neuroscientists that have proven that like music prepares the brain for change. And to go back to what Hannah had said there, like worship and formation being inseparable. Like when we sing, like, and when there is music played, like our brain, like it's scientifically proven, it prepares itself for change.
Yes.
So there is like there's the biblical framework, there's also a scientific level of this, but I think through experience, seeing people come to faith without any laying of hands or any gospel preached, seeing people like just, what was that, a few months ago at in-house, somebody's back healed just in the midst of worship. So I think like when you look at all those things, I just think it's really hard to get away from like this is so important for our community that we lean in. And I think I referenced this in one of the other videos, but like that we don't spectate, but that we come to participate, and it's not a choice, it's clearly a command in the scriptures.
It's really, really helpful. And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years, and it speaks to the spectating participation piece, is that one of the things, whenever, because we all have Sundays, even dare I say yourselves, whenever you are leading us in worship, that there's going to be Sundays or other gatherings where you aren't really feeling it, right? And there's definitely Sundays whenever I come in, and that's definitely the case. And yet there's something that I've learned over the years, that whenever you even witness other people worshiping, that it then stirs something within you to then move from spectating them to also participating. And I just think that for us just to keep spurring one another on in our worship, I just think is so important. So I think whenever we do allow ourselves to move from a place of like worship is just this loose thing that kind of is by ourselves, to also allowing ourselves to be formed in community, I think something really significant happens. Can I just ask you both, just as a way to wrap this up, like whenever you look ahead and whenever you look to our community, like what would you long for us to grow in whenever it comes to our worship? Like as we move from spectating to participation, whenever you consider how we are formed in our worship, what are some of the things that you would long for us to continue to grow in?
Yeah, I mean, I probably have two things, and maybe if you have anything to add to that. But I mean, the first thing is to speak to what you've said, so it's slightly different language, which is that we would become thermostats when it comes to worship as opposed to thermometers.
Just explain that for us.
Yeah, so like a thermometer reads the temperature of the room and tells you that, whereas a thermostat, is set to a specific temperature, and then everything else rises to that. So you're not actually conforming to the temperature around you, you are setting the temperature. And I mean, I can't remember where I heard that years ago, but it just always really stuck with me. It's like in season, out of season, highs, lows, mountain, peak, valley, that regardless of what's going on, again, we talked about this in another video, like worship, it's inseparable to sacrifice. Like they are the same thing. Like you can't, it costs us something. And I would just love to see that it would be said of Lagan Valley Vineyard that we would be mature worshippers that would worship in season and out of season, because you can't worship God for what he's done. You have to worship him for who he is, and that's kind of the line you have to cross to do that. I think the second thing is referring back to just like the kind of biblical invitation to express ourselves a little bit more. I think we have a wee bit of growing in that area to do, and that's not us kind of judging how well a time of worship went based on how many hands were lifted or how many people were doing somersaults around the room. Oh, there's no somersaults in there, by the way. You will be sent to the exit door. No, just kidding. But there are flags. But genuinely, like I think like that would be another thing for me. Like I just love to see us get past ourselves a little bit and just be able to express ourselves a little bit more, you know, because like I know, and again, like there's two standing point. There's the biblical foundation of this, but there's also my personal experience. Like it's clear that it's in there, but also I know that when I've moved past the fear of people around me, if I feel like I just need to kneel down,
Sure.
there's something happens when you take on a different posture with your body, that you connect deeper with God, you know, lifting your hands, whatever it is. And yeah, I suppose I would just love us to kind of lean into that a little bit more and express ourselves a little bit more, because I do think God has something for us on the other side of that, you know.
Do you have anything to add in terms
No,
of like
just
hopes and longings for?
yeah, definitely just around that kind of the role of the body in worship, you know, like it's not a metric of whether you're engaged in worship or not in terms of if you have your hands up, you know, like that's not how yeah, you measure that, but it is a measure of how we understand theologically the purpose of our bodies in worship, you know. And I think that like whenever we look at like our kids in worship and our young people in worship as well, they're so free in themselves physically with their bodies in worship, and that is maturity. It's not maturity to then close everything down and it to, you know, to move from that place of like, oh, that's just them having loads of crack. It's like we're meant to have so much freedom in worship, you know, and there's something really, really beautiful in that. And so yeah, I think that is something, I think just us, myself included, just understanding the role of our bodies physically in worship is something that I would really love for us to step into as we look at the season ahead.
Definitely. And can I just say one quick last thing is just, I mean, I was just toying around with whether to play this or not, or say this, but I mean, like another thing we want to see happen through our worship is like for songs to come, you know. And the reason I was kind of not sure whether to say this or not was just, you know, that feels like that's for like such a specific group of people in our community. But I was just reminded there, literally, as I was sitting here, about the story of like Rob Mark's song Jesus All for Jesus, and how, like, I don't really know the story about that, but there's literally just somebody in the congregation came with like these words on a page, and they just like handed it to Rob, and it's like, I think there's a song in this, and he went away and, you know, put music to it. So like just to kind of speak to like the poets, the prophets, the people that are good with words, or even just aren't, and get a sense from God that, you know, here's maybe an idea for song, like come and give them to us, because we are leaning into it as much as we can. And obviously with this song coming out, House of Prayer, maybe it's already out by the time this video's out, but yeah, we're really wanting to go after that, that we capture the heart of God and then are able to sing those truths, because, you know, sermons are great, Stu, but songs are forming people much more these days.
They really are. They really are. And I think, just to close out, I think particularly whenever it comes to some of the conversations that our tribes are going to be having, one of the things I would love for us all to reflect upon is, like, you will know this much better than I will, but just in looking at the way that the church has sort of arranged itself over the past number of years, there has been this sort of focus on the stage, focus on the worship leader, whereas everything that we've been talking about is actually, this requires all of us. It requires all of us to be investing in a lifestyle, like, you know, Monday through to Sunday, that we're all consciously half halting, we're consciously becoming aware of the presence of Jesus and adoring him in the midst of the thick of our lives. And whenever we step into our space on a Sunday or whenever, that actually it requires all of us. And I think for me, whenever I consider what it looks like for us to continue to grow in worship, it's to grow in a way of worship that is not centered on ourselves, that is constantly open to what God is wanting to do, but also to create a space where we're pushing each other in the best way, pulling each other into a way of worship that allows us to be able to worship God even more, but also be formed even more into his likeness. And so as our tribes gather to chat about this, I guess that was why the challenge I love to leave us with, of what does it look like for us all to play our part, not just spectate a stage, but actually to participate into the ways of praise. And James loves alliteration. So with that, I'll leave it with that. You love that, participate in praise. It's good. Hannah, James, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.